This week, the lead story in the Torah, the record of our people's sacred history, and the lead story in the newspaper of record, the New York Times, was the same. Civil war in the Middle East. Assyria continues to wage war with itself. The age-old questions of how to lead and how to live in the Middle East, and whether it's even possible to do so in peace, have again become the focus of the world's attention. Thousands of years after the time of the Torah, the same issues continue to tear at the fabric of that society. Asking, does the authority to govern lie with the will of the people or in the hands of the most powerful? What is the extent and the limit of government power? And when it is used to further evil purposes, does leadership, does government lose its moral and its actual authority? Those questions are not new, as our Torah portion attests. They're not even specific to the Middle East, though they often seem most intractable there. But the solutions to those questions are also as old as the problems. This week's Parsha provides some of the answers. In the case of Korakh, who gives his name to this week's Parsha, and his cousin Moses, we have two members of the same tribe vying for power. Moses' authority derives from God. He was chosen to be God's prophet, even convinced to be God's prophet, and has successfully led the people out of slavery in Egypt to Mount Sinai, and now to the very edge of the Promised Land. Having reached what should have been the end of that story, the people themselves balk. Last week's Parsha recounted how, despite the fact of God's promise of their conquest of the land, the people's representatives refused to endorse the plan for conquest and settlement. Korakh's rebellion is one of the results of that failure of nerve. Having lost the opportunity to take the land that God had promised them, the people turn against Moses and against one another. For his part, Korakh, the rebels' leader, derives his authority to lead from his status as a Levi, the same clan as Moses and Aaron, and he has at least a small portion of truth on which he bases his challenge. His claim that Moses is not the only one capable of leading, and that Moses has not delivered on his promises, are true as far as they go. Of course, Korakh conveniently leaves out the culpability of the failed scouts and of the people's constant squabbling with Moses over food and water. Moses may certainly be a flawed leader, but he is as close to a perfect one as anyone could have hoped for in those circumstances. Korakh overreaches, and the threat of civil war, not to mention his refusal to honor the divine election of Moses as leader, dooms him and his followers to destruction. The lesson, then as now, is that the authority to lead is vested in the ultimate power of a society, God in the case of the Israelites, and the electorate in the case of civil governments. But having assumed power, there are also responsibilities inherent in the role of leader, and limits to how far that authority extends. If God had, for instance, thrown Moses out of office for his occasional lapses of judgment, and put Korakh or anyone else in his place, the ultimate authority would have been legal, because it would have been transferred under God's authority from one man to another. Korakh isn't entitled to take it on his own. A government or political party in our time that doesn't respect due process, the rule of law, or the people whom they govern are not worthy of governing. And when they further their aims through violence against their own people, they forfeit their authority entirely. When the earth closed over Korakh and his rebels, the road to the Promised Land was not going to then be easy or swift. But the people finally understood that the right path would lead them there. Perhaps it is naively hopeful, but we may yet see the earth close over Syria's President Assad, one of the last of the Arab world's dictators, as well as the terrorists who are now fighting against him to gain the upper hand in Syria. It may already be too late for Syria as a multi-ethnic state, but if there is hope for a return to the promised land of peace for its people, it lies in the recognition of the civil and human rights of the average citizen in Syria and throughout the Middle East. This week, we hope and pray that the world community can stand together against governments such as Assad's that will not yield to the will of their people, and for a speedy conclusion of its civil war. It is certainly in the interests of Israel that that war comes to an end, and that its strains of interethnic violence cease. Israel may actually have a role to play in the still unwritten next chapter of the region. If Israel's leaders can conclude their conflict with the Palestinians, those two peoples could easily model how to live in peace in the Middle East in countries with ethnic and religious minorities whose rights are enshrined in law and respected by their governments. We pray that civil war yields to civil peace, so that the fate of Korakh be forsaken for the paths of peace. Shabbat Shalom.